Now, did entrepreneurship kind of come from your background? Were your parents entrepreneurs? Like, how did what brought that on?
No. I was not really encouraged to get involved in starting my own business. I mean, I only heard stories of family members or friends that had started and failed in business. Though when I told my mom I wanted to start a softball league, of course, she was totally supportive of it. She thought it was a great idea, but I think I've jokingly have said in the past that if I told my mom I was going to rob a bank, she would say, "Well, honey, I know you're going to be the best at it," and she was
Very supportive.
Yeah, she would have been very supportive. My dad was on the opposite end of the spectrum in that he was very conservative. He had a very successful career working in the medical field, but on the clinical side, and so he saw it as risk. He saw it as unnecessary risk because I had a really solid medical sales career, but it wasn't my dream. And I think maybe that's the problem when we venture off into entrepreneurship, that we have to make sure that we're doing something that we're living our dream and not living the dream through somebody else's eyes. And so my dad and I we didn't see eye to eye back then in my early 20s, and he didn't really understand what my vision was. And that's okay. I always say that our parents, our family, our friends, they love us. They want to see us to succeed. And when they tell us all the reasons why they think something is going to fail, it's because they don't see it for themselves. And that was the lesson I learned back then. I didn't realize it at the time, but as a 55-year-old now, I know why.
Looking back, yeah.
Yes.
When you're in it, your family, like you've said before, they have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
They don't want to see you fail. And because they can't see it in themselves, they kind of project the fear onto you. And that kind of happened to me, entrepreneur to entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I've kind of went through that journey as well. It's funny because not to make this about me, but, I was in medical as well. I worked in a medical laboratory, and I had the career, I had the good paying job. And when I quit to do this, I did get a lot of pushback. Was that your experience as well?
Of course. And it's normal. And then what happens after your business takes off? We're often told, "I knew you were going to be successful. I knew it was going to work out." I'm like, that's not exactly the story that I remember, but that's okay.
Yeah. You can't fake results. So once you produce those results, people can't deny it.
Right. But people don't warn us on how difficult it is to succeed in entrepreneurship. Like, I think the number one thing you need in order to be successful in business is hunger. You have to be driven. There's this term that Rick Pitino, the Hall of Fame college basketball coach, said in a book, Success is a Choice, is a book he wrote back in the mid-90s. I love Rick's book, and it was a book that I read back then that drove me. And he talked about having the PhD attitude, passionate, hungry, and driven. And he looked to recruit basketball players for his college back in the day. This was back in the 90s for the University of Kentucky. And he looked for kids that had PhDs. And I think that's what it takes in order to be successful, is that you have to be passionate, hungry, and driven, because it gets you through tough times.
Oh, I love that. And speaking of, kind of the people who brought you to where you are today in terms of mentorship, you talk a lot about Tony Robbins. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I know that there was a few stories that you kind of told me that kind of pivoted your whole mindset on business and entrepreneurship and passion. And go ahead and take us right from there.
Well, again, I was not really encouraged to be an entrepreneur, and I was miserable in my medical sales career. And I was one of those people in the early 90s, up at 3 o'clock in the morning, kind of stressing, having anxiety about going to work the next day. And I had the infomercial. The infomercial was on, like it was on so many times back in the early 90s, of personal power and 30 days to, 30 days to freedom, or whatever it was back then. I remember
that was a late night.
Yeah. It's Tony, Tony in his Hawaiian shirt with the palm tree swaying, and, some actors and actresses, interviewing him. But what it gave me, though, listening to Tony back then in the early 90s, was it gave me hope. And hope is ultimately what I really needed. And so I would drive around in the 5 boroughs of New York City, listening to Tony on my DVD player, driving around from hospital to hospital. And so Tony was a big influence on me very early on. But I'll tell you the big shift for me was I finally went to my first live Tony event in 1999. And what I was hoping to get out of it, this was called Unleash the Power Within. It's his signature event. It's the fire walk that people have known about for many, many years. the defining moment for me, and the reason why I went to that event, was I wanted to have the breakthrough of finally quitting my career in medical sales that I was so miserable doing for 10 years, and to go ahead and make the leap into running my business full time. And it was scary for me because in 1999, my wife and I had our daughter. We had a new home. I had the comfort and security of benefits and a company car and a salary, and to give all of that up.
The golden handcuffs.
The golden handcuffs is what I had. And believe it or not, going to UPW was life-changing for me, because what I had was a mind shift change that actually made it more risky for me not to quit the job. In other words, I thought about all the things that would happen if I didn't quit my medical sales career, all the things I was going to miss out on. I thought about how I would tell my daughter one day on how you should just live in a secure environment of safe certainty of working for somebody. And that just didn't resonate with me. And I didn't want that to be my future. And so I decided that it was time to do it and make the break. It was December of 1999. I decided I was going to leave my career, and I left it in April of 2000, and my business doubled. I made more money in 2000 than I ever did in medical sales in 10 years. Yeah.
So when you left your job, you hadn't equaled your income, right? Like you weren't making the same thing that you were making doing medical sales?
Oh my gosh, no. It was barely going to be able to make ends meet. And I think that's I've talked about this on some of the shows about not having a plan B. I'm a huge believer in not having a plan B. If I had kept that medical sales job, I believe I would have never achieved the success that I had achieved in business, because anytime the business would have got hard, I would have said, well, I have the career to fall back on. But when you burn the boats and say, I'm going to take the island and this is it, I have no choice. At that point, I had a 1-year-old at home. I had a mortgage. I had car payments. I had to make it work. I had no choice. And that's why I believe plan B is a cop-out. And I know it's not for everybody. Again, I was passionate, hungry, driven. I was willing to do whatever it took to succeed. But that's what worked for me.
You said that you kept kind of doing both, right? So you kept the softball league in New York. You started a league here in Florida. What was that like? What was that conflict like?
It was insanity. For many years, when I franchised, for many years, I didn't tell people what life was really like doing both because I didn't want to discourage them. But I was miserable at times. But as miserable as I was running an adult men's softball league, which entailed me flying to Long Island several times a year to talk with the parks and rec people, go to the schools, get my fields renewed, have in-person registration meetings. All those things were happening in New York, while here in Florida, I'm running my kids' flag football league. I'm getting referees. I'm getting fields. I'm doing all the marketing. It was it was insanity. And I didn't know how I was going to really break away from this. And the story that I didn't share with most people, I've kept private, is that at one point I actually considered selling my softball league and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to give up and be done. And I realized that was going to be the wrong answer, because the softball league was actually the thing that was succeeding and was doing well. But there was so much stress and anxiety of running a business from 1,500 miles away before the internet. Keep in mind, this is around 2000, 1999, 2000, when this all happened. It was extremely stressful.
What made you kind of decide to, okay, I need to focus on just the Florida business?
Well, that's not really what happened either. Believe it or not, the Florida business, the flag football league for kids, was probably even more stressful because I didn't have anybody helping me on either business. I had college kids that were refereeing games, often not showing up. I was running out to the field and refereeing the games. And ultimately what I decided was that there was the most potential running my adult men's softball league, which I had put all the years in, the blood, sweat, and tears of growing the business. And I realized that I was giving up the business that actually, I was going to bite the hand that was actually feeding me. But I realized that I couldn't keep doing everything. So what I ended up doing was I ended up stopped running my kids' flag football league. And I stopped that for years before I ever franchised it. Before I franchised kids sports.
Yeah.
So my claim to fame, or my real business thesis, was really based on my adult men's softball league in Long Island. It was not kids sports, which I know as we start talking about I-9 is kids sports, but that's not really where I really made my bread and butter.
So then what was the inception of the I-9? Like how did that kind of come about? Was that before or after you franchised?
Well, I-9 was the reason why I franchised. Like I came up with I-9 Sports as a result of deciding to franchise. Again, I knew that we were going to grow our business. I didn't know I was going to open company-owned locations or how am I going to expand this thing. 'Cause I knew we were onto something and I knew that other people were going to do it. And being first to market was like really important to me. And I didn't know how long that runway was going to be until I got national competition. So I ultimately, when I franchised the name I-9 Sports, and it was both adult men and women's softball, and it was also kids sports. And that was the birth of I-9. We were going to be everything to everybody because quite honestly, I didn't know which one was going to succeed. Gotcha. That is the real truth.
So you always say that franchising found you. How did franchising found you as opposed to, the licensing or any other kind of, growth medium for a business? What was it about franchising that kind of drew you in and said, this is the way that we're going to expand?
Well, what drew me in was I knew, again, I didn't want to hire people. I knew I couldn't have afforded to hire people. And I knew that I wanted to be first to market. So when I started looking at the different options, whether it's opening company-owned locations, whether it's licensing, which I really think is kind of it's the cheap route of going into it. I'm a big believer in being a student of your industry and you can never learn enough, right? It's ongoing. I'm a huge believer in personal growth and development. And so I started going to franchise conferences and I started talking to franchise consultants. And the more and more I learned about franchising, the more excited I got that this was a way of really legitimizing a business. And if you think about it, the amateur sports industry had been around for about 100 years. If you include, Little League Baseball and Pop Warner football that went back to, 1929. But as far back as the business had gone, there wasn't a whole lot of structure outside of Little League Baseball and Pop Warner. And I thought that we had a huge opportunity here that I thought, if not me, then who else, right? I had a shot at doing this.
So nobody else had franchised youth sports?
Nobody had franchised youth sports at all. And that ended up being a blessing and a curse, as I came to find out, because when I decided to franchise I-9, I was super excited about it. But as I quickly found out, as the person selling the franchises, me, I was defending the industry in that it was a legitimate business. Most people would say to me, how do you even make money doing this? And I would try to compare us, Little League Baseball and Pop Warner football and YMCA and Parks and Rec, and people just didn't get it.
So you got some pushback.
I got a lot of pushback. And I think that's one of the challenges when you're starting a sector, when you're pioneering in an industry, is that you have to convince people it's even a legitimate business. There was nothing to compare it to. That was quite a difficult time for us in 2003. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.